The changes began immediately after that memorable meeting. The old cleaning cart still stood in her office, now restored to its rightful place, as a reminder of everything she'd learned. But the company that had lost its way was transforming one day at a time. The first week brought the biggest shakeup. Several members of the executive team resigned, including the CEO, who had tried to stop her presentation. Others were asked to leave after a thorough review of her evidence. The VP who had mocked her English packed up his office on a quiet Friday afternoon, avoiding eye contact with everyone. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding something better. She started with the foundation, the people who kept the company running every day. The maintenance staff got their first raise in 3 years, along with full benefits and flexible scheduling. The night security guard's daughter, who had been rejected for the programming position, was hired into the development team. Within months, she became one of their strongest coders. The physical changes came next. The stark division between executive and employee areas disappeared. The break room was renovated not with expensive furniture, but with comfortable chairs and tables where people actually wanted to gather. The suggestion box was replaced with weekly open forums where every voice carried equal weight. Remember when we used to be lunch alone at our desks? One employee mentioned during a team meeting. Now I actually look forward to break time. The cafeteria had become a place where developers sat with maintenance staff, sharing stories and ideas. The artificial barriers between departments began to crumble. Her old notebook, filled with observations from her time as a janitor, became a roadmap for change. Every complaint, every whispered concern, every ignored request was addressed. The employee who had been denied medical leave was not only given time off, but received support from a newly established employee assistance fund. The technical teams flourished under new leadership that valued quality over quick profits. Take the time to do it right became the new mantra, replacing the rushed deadlines and cutting corners of the past. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb as products improved and support teams were properly staffed. But the most significant changes were in the small, daily interactions. Executives now knew the names of cleaning staff. Project managers held doors open for maintenance workers. The hierarchy that had poisoned the company culture was replaced with genuine respect at every level. One morning, she arrived early out of habit and found the night security guard teaching another executive some basic coding. He mentioned wanting to understand our developers better. The guard explained with a smile. Thought I'd share what my daughter taught me. The company's success followed naturally. Without the burden of toxic management and fear-based policies, innovation flourished. The best talent in the industry began seeking them out, attracted by stories of their unique culture. I heard this was a place where everyone matters, new applicants would say during interviews. 6 months after her revelation, she stood in the same conference hall, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. People sat together regardless of their position, chatting and laughing before the meeting began. The cleaning staff had seats right in the front, no longer hidden in the shadows. Our profits have doubled, she announced, but that's not what makes us successful. She clicked to a slide showing photos from the recent company picnic. Developers playing basketball with security guards, HR staff sharing food with maintenance workers, executives' children playing with the cleaning staff's families. This is our success. We're not just a company anymore, we're a community. The young developer who had once been berated by his team lead was now leading his own project, mentoring new hires with patience and understanding. The kind receptionist who had saved cookies for the cleaning staff was promoted to office manager, bringing her compassion to a bigger role. Looking out at the faces in the room, some familiar from her days, pushing a cleaning cart, others new but equally valued, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The company hadn't just recovered, it had transformed into something better than she'd ever imagined. Never forget, she concluded, that greatness doesn't come from corner offices or expensive suits. It comes from treating every person, every job, and every contribution with respect. Sometimes, the best view of a company isn't from the top floor, it's from the ground up. The morning of the company-wide meeting dawned like any other. Lynn arrived at 4 a.m., changed into her gray uniform, and began her usual cleaning routine. But today, her cleaning cart carried something extra. A small USB drive containing months of carefully gathered evidence. The all-hands meeting had been called to address the concerning trend of employee departures. The irony wasn't lost on her as she watched employees file into the main conference hall, their faces tense with speculation about more bad news. She positioned herself near the back, mop in hand, just another member of the maintenance staff doing their job. The new CEO stood at the podium, his expensive suit practically gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "We've noticed some concerns about company culture," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "But let me assure you, everything is under control. Our internal surveys show that 85% of employees are satisfied with their work environment." From her position by the wall, Lynn could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. She knew those survey results were manipulated. She'd seen the original data in the HR department's shredding bin. The real satisfaction rate was below 40%. Furthermore, the CEO continued, "We're proud to announce new efficiency measures that will streamline our operations." He clicked to the next slide, revealing charts that she knew were doctored. She'd seen the real numbers in those late-night finance meetings. That's when she made her move. Quietly setting down her mop, she walked slowly but purposefully toward the stage. A security guard started to move toward her, then stopped, recognizing her as part of the cleaning staff. The CEO paused mid-sentence, noticing the movement. "Please," he said, irritation clear in his voice, "we're in the middle of an important meeting. The cleaning can wait." She kept walking, her heart pounding but her step steady. Reaching the stage, she turned to face the audience. The room had gone completely silent. Hundreds of eyes watched as she reached up and pulled the tie from her hair, letting it fall naturally around her shoulders. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and strong, no trace of the broken English she'd been using for months, "I think this cleaning is long overdue." The recognition didn't come immediately. Then it gasped from the back of the room. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, that's her." The whispers spread like wildfire through the audience as people began to realize who was standing before them. She plugged the USB drive into the laptop controlling the presentation. The CEO tried to step forward, but she held up her hand. "Before you say anything, you might want to see what's on this drive." The screen behind her filled with documents, photos, and recordings, all the evidence she'd gathered over the past months. "For those who don't recognize me, I'm not just Lynn the janitor. I'm one of the original founders of this company." The CEO's face had gone pale. In the audience, the VP who had mocked her English was slinking down in his seat. "I've spent the last few months watching, listening, and learning. I've cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, and heard your conversations. I've seen how this company, which we built to empower and innovate, has become everything we fought against." She clicked through the evidence, the doctored financial reports, the harassment complaints, the safety violations. "Every person in this room has value," she continued, "from the newest intern to the most experienced developer, from the cafeteria staff to the security team. But somewhere along the way, some of us forgot that." The room remained silent, but the energy had shifted. She could see hope beginning to replace fear in people's eyes. The maintenance staff had moved to the front of the room, standing tall for perhaps the first time in that building. Today isn't about pointing fingers or seeking revenge. It's about healing and rebuilding. Every single person in this room deserves to work in an environment of respect, honesty, and true innovation. She looked directly at the executive team. Some changes will need to be made, starting now. As she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People were standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. The security guard who had saved her coffee every morning was grinning broadly. The young developer who'd been passed over for promotion was cheering. The cleaning cart still stood at the back of the room, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. She was no longer invisible, but she would never forget what she'd learned from being unseen. The signs of a company in crisis were becoming impossible to ignore. As Lynn arrived for her early morning shift, she noticed more empty desks each day. The vibrant energy that once filled the office had dimmed to a nervous whisper. Even the plants she watered seemed to be wilting under the weight of the toxic atmosphere. 3 more resignation letters appeared in the HR department's shredding bin that week. While sorting recycling, she carefully smoothed out the crumpled papers. Each letter told the same story: hostile work environment, ethical concerns, lack of work-life balance. These weren't just junior employees leaving. They were team leaders, project managers, people who had been with the company since its early days. The break room conversations she overheard while mopping had changed too. Instead of discussing weekend plans or sharing lunch recipes, people whispered about job interviews and updated resumes. "Did you hear about the tech team?" One employee murmured to another. "Half of them got offers from other companies. They're leaving as a group." Her fellow cleaning staff noticed the shift as well. "The trash bins are full of family photos and personal items," her coworker told her during their morning coffee break. "People are packing up their desks, but trying to do it slowly so nobody notices." They watched as employees carried small boxes to their cars each day, clearing out their spaces bit by bit. The new management team seemed oblivious to the exodus, or perhaps they simply didn't care. In a morning meeting, she observed, while dusting conference room blinds, they discussed replacing expensive senior staff with fresh graduates who don't have unrealistic expectations about work-life balance. The company's products were suffering too. While cleaning the customer service area, she overheard calls about bugs in the software, delayed updates, and unhappy clients. The development team, now half its original size, struggled to maintain quality while being pushed to release new features faster and faster. One evening, as she cleaned the executive floor, she found a spreadsheet left on the printer. It showed customer satisfaction ratings in a steep decline. Next to it was a memo about cutting the customer support team's budget. The disconnect was staggering. While the company was bleeding customers, management was focused on short-term cost savings. The HR department had become a revolving door of new hires and exits. She watched as they brought in consultants to discuss employee retention strategies, while ignoring the actual employees who were trying to raise concerns. The suggestion box she emptied each week was overflowing with unread feedback. During lunch breaks, she sat with her fellow maintenance workers, listening to their observations. They saw everything: which departments worked late, which managers made their teams cry, which executives took long business lunches that smelled like whiskey. The cleaning staff had become the unofficial historians of the company's decline. The breaking point came during a company-wide meeting about workplace culture improvement. As she pretended to clean the back of the auditorium, she watched the new VP of Human Resources present slides about employee engagement and corporate values. The same VP who had earlier that week denied medical leave to a pregnant employee. That night, alone in her small apartment, she spread out all her evidence on the kitchen table. Her notebook had grown thick with observations, photos, and documents. The flip phone contained recordings of inappropriate conversations and questionable meetings. She had proof of everything: the financial misconduct, the harassment, the safety violations, the toxic management practices. Looking at her reflection in the window, she barely recognized herself in the maintenance uniform. But these past months had taught her more about leadership than all her years in the executive suite. She'd seen firsthand how decisions made in comfortable boardrooms affected real people's lives. How a company's culture wasn't built through motivational posters and mission statements, but through daily interactions and small moments of respect, or lack thereof. Tomorrow would be different. She had watched long enough. The company she had helped build was like a sick patient, and she finally had the complete diagnosis. Now it was time for the cure, even if it meant some painful medicine. Being invisible had its advantages. As Lynn pushed her cleaning cart through the office after hours, she became a silent witness to conversations never meant for her ears. The late-night meetings behind closed doors, the hushed phone calls in empty conference rooms, she heard it all. One evening, while emptying trash bins in the finance department, she noticed something odd. Two finance executives were huddled over a computer, speaking in low voices. "Move these expenses to the research budget," one whispered. "No one checks those numbers carefully." She slowed her movements, pretending to struggle with a stubborn trash bag while listening carefully. The next day, she found crumpled spreadsheets in the shredding bin, ones that told a very different story from the official reports she'd seen in board meetings. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed out the papers, taking quick photos with her old flip phone. The evidence was mounting piece by piece. In the IT department, she discovered more troubling signs. While cleaning around the developers' desks late one night, she overheard the tech lead pressuring a junior programmer. "Just push the update live," he insisted. "We can fix the security issues later." She knew enough about software development to understand the danger in those words. They were putting user data at risk to meet arbitrary deadlines. The cleaning staff had become her best source of information. They shared stories over their morning coffee, not realizing that their observations were being carefully documented. The new manager on floor A takes long meetings with his assistant in the conference room, one cleaner mentioned. But we've seen them getting too close, if you know what I mean. Another added, and have you noticed how many boxes the marketing team shreds on Fridays? Never seen so much paper waste. Her notebook had sections now: financial irregularities, HR violations, safety concerns, ethical breaches. Each entry was dated and detailed, backed up by photos or documents whenever possible. The simple flip phone she carried as part of her janitor persona had become a powerful tool, capturing evidence that would be hard to dismiss. Sometimes, the hardest part was maintaining her cover when she witnessed clear injustice. A young intern was blamed for a senior manager's mistake, nearly losing her position. A maintenance worker was written up for taking an emergency phone call about his sick child. A talented developer was passed over for promotion because she didn't fit the company image. The security guards became her allies without knowing it. They shared their access logs, complaining about executives who came in at strange hours or brought in unauthorized visitors. Something fishy about those weekend visits, the night guard told her, showing her the entry timestamps. But who's going to question the big bosses, right? One night, she stayed later than usual, knowing the CFO had scheduled a private meeting. Hidden behind her cleaning cart, she recorded a conversation that made her stomach turn. They were discussing ways to inflate company values before the next funding round, planning to present false growth numbers to investors. The weight of everything she discovered was becoming heavy. Each day, she watched good employees suffer while unethical behavior went unchecked. The company she helped build was rotting from the inside, and the rot went deeper than she'd initially feared. Her own co-founders were no longer recognizable in their executive roles. In board meetings she occasionally glimpsed through conference room windows, they sat silently while the new management team dismantled everything they built together. Their original mission of creating an ethical, employee-focused company had been lost in the pursuit of quick profits. The hardest moments were when employees tried to help her. A kind-hearted receptionist always saved her a cookie from office celebrations. A software engineer taught her basic English phrases, thinking she was struggling with the language. Their genuine kindness made the deception harder to bear, but it also strengthened her resolve to fix things. As she drove home that night, the streetlights casting long shadows on her dashboard, she reviewed her mental checklist. She had enough evidence now: financial misconduct, workplace harassment, safety violations, ethical breaches. The question wasn't whether to act anymore, but how to do it in a way that would protect the innocent while exposing the guilty. The tension in the office had been building like a pressure cooker over the past month. Lynn could feel it in the air as she pushed her cleaning cart through the corridors each morning. The friendly smiles she'd occasionally received from employees were replaced by stressed frowns and worried glances at phones and watches. It started with small things. The new management team had implemented stricter time tracking policies. Employees now had to log every minute of their workday, even bathroom breaks. She watched as people rushed through their lunches, afraid to take their full hour. The break room, once filled with laughter and conversation, had become eerily quiet. One morning, while cleaning the developer's floor, she overheard a team lead berating a junior programmer. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should find another job," he snapped, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The young developer's hands shook as he tried to explain a technical challenge. Lynn pretended to mop the same spot, her heart aching as she watched the scene unfold. The cleaning staff felt the changes too. Their supply requests were being denied or delayed. "Use what you have more efficiently," the new operations manager had told them. Meanwhile, she'd noticed the same manager approving expensive office renovations for the executive floor. Things took a darker turn during a particularly tense week. While cleaning the women's restroom, she overheard two employees discussing how their colleague had been passed over for promotion. "Again, they said she's not executive material," one whispered. "But we all know it's because she spoke up about the harassment in her department." The real eye-opener came during a company-wide meeting she watched while dusting the back of the conference room. The new VP of Operations stood at the podium, presenting slides about streamlining efficiency and optimizing human resources. Behind him, Excel sheets showed budget cuts targeting the lowest-paid workers first. Later that day, she was mopping near the HR office when the VP walked past. Her mop handle accidentally brushed against the wall, making a small sound. He turned sharply, his face twisted with annoyance. "Can't you people do your job quietly?" he snapped. "And your English is terrible. Learn to speak properly if you want to keep working here." She kept her head down, murmuring an apology, but her hands gripped the mop handle tighter. In her other life, she'd given presentations to international investors. She'd closed million-dollar deals. But here, wearing this uniform, her worth was measured by how invisible she could make herself. The next week, she witnessed something that made her blood boil. The night security guard's daughter, the one taking coding lessons, had applied for an entry-level programming position. She was qualified with a computer science degree and impressive personal projects. Lynn watched from a hallway as the hiring manager tossed her resume aside, making a joke about maintenance staff should stick to maintenance. During lunch breaks, she now heard fewer conversations about weekend plans or family stories. Instead, people whispered about updating their resumes and LinkedIn profiles. The best employees, the ones who cared about their work and their colleagues, were quietly planning their exits. The breaking point came when she discovered a pattern in the financial reports she glimpsed while cleaning the accounting department after hours. Expense reports were being doctored, with luxury items being classified as essential business expenses. Meanwhile, requests for new safety equipment for the maintenance team had been repeatedly denied. She wrote everything in her notebook, which had grown thick with observations. The company she'd helped build, the one that was supposed to value innovation and human potential, had become exactly the kind of toxic workplace she'd wanted to avoid. The worst part wasn't the blatant discrimination or the financial misconduct. It was watching good people lose their spark, their enthusiasm crushed under the weight of poor leadership. That evening, as she drove home in her old Honda, she made a decision. The time for quiet observation was coming to an end. She'd seen enough. The company needed more than just a wake-up call. It needed a complete reset. And she was the only one in a position to make it happen. 2 weeks into her undercover role, Lynn's hands had already grown calloused from the constant cleaning. The expensive hand cream she once used sat unused in her other life's bathroom cabinet. These days, she preferred the moisturizer her fellow cleaning staff recommended. It actually worked better for their shared reality. Her morning routine had become second nature. Arrive at 4 a.m., check in with the night guard, whom now saved her a cup of coffee, and start with the lobby before the early birds arrived. The other cleaning staff had welcomed her warmly, sharing their shortcuts and secrets for managing the massive workspace efficiently. "Watch out for the 10th floor," her colleague had warned during her first week. "Those marketing folks leave their takeout containers everywhere, and they never finish their coffee." She'd been right. The marketing department's trash cans told stories of late nights and rushed deadlines, with half-eaten meals and countless coffee cups. One morning, while mopping near the break room, she overheard two executives discussing budget cuts. "We can trim from maintenance first," one said, leaning against her freshly cleaned windows. "It's not like anyone notices what they do anyway." She kept mopping, hiding her slight smile. If only they knew they were discussing cost-cutting measures right in front of a major shareholder. The corporate hierarchy became clearer with each passing day. She watched as mid-level managers spoke kindly to executives but turned around and snapped at their teams. Junior employees huddled in corners, sharing worried whispers about job security. The cleaning staff, security guards, and maintenance workers had their own social circle, one that saw and knew everything but was rarely acknowledged. Her notebook filled with observations. Floor 7, team stressed about unrealistic deadlines. Floor 12, new manager makes inappropriate comments to female staff. Floor 3, tech support team needs better equipment, using outdated computers. The most revealing moments came during after-hours cleaning. Once, while emptying trash bins in the HR department, she found torn-up resignation letters from 3 different employees, all citing toxic work environment as their reason for leaving. Another time, she overheard a late working manager bragging on the phone about taking credit for his junior's project. she learned to identify the good ones too. The team leader who always thanked the cleaning staff by name. The developer who stayed late to help the night security guard with his daughter's coding homework. The executive assistant who kept snacks in her desk for maintenance workers on long shifts. One particular morning stood out. She was cleaning the conference room windows when the new vice president of sales walked in with his team. He was rehearsing for a client presentation, his voice loud and confident. Coffee was spilled, papers were scattered, and crumbs were left everywhere. As his team filed out, he looked directly at her and said, "Make sure this room sparkles by lunch. And try not to leave those ugly streaks on the windows this time." She nodded silently, continuing her work. Through the reflection in the window, she watched him straighten his expensive tie, practicing his power stance. The same tie, she noticed, that her company had given out as executive gifts last quarter, gifts she had helped select. Later that day, during her lunch break in the staff room, she sat with Ming from the night shift and listened to stories about working multiple jobs to put kids through college. These conversations meant more to her than any executive meeting she'd ever attended. They were real, untainted by corporate politics or personal agendas. The cleaning cart became her shield, allowing her to move through the building unnoticed. People spoke freely around her, assuming she either couldn't understand or didn't matter. Every floor told a different story, every department had its own culture, and every level of hierarchy showed its true colors when they thought no one important was watching. As she drove home that evening, she realized that her expensive business degree hadn't taught her half as much about running a company as 2 weeks of pushing a cleaning car had. The real education wasn't in spreadsheets or board meetings, it was in the quiet observations of human nature, in the way people treated others when they thought it didn't count. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when a simple Honda Civic pulled into the vast parking lot of Innovatech's gleaming headquarters. The car was at least 10 years old, with a small dent on the passenger door, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles that would fill the spots in a few hours. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her mid-30s, her black hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, just a plain gray uniform with maintenance staff stitched across the pocket. Looking at her, no one would guess that she owned half the building she was about to clean. Just 6 months ago, she had stood on a stage, delivering a passionate speech about Innovatech's successful launch. The company's innovative software solutions had caught the attention of major investors, turning it into a billion-dollar enterprise almost overnight. While her co-founders reveled in the spotlight, she had been quietly forming a different plan. "The best view of a house isn't from the top floor," her grandmother used to say, "it's from the foundation." Those words echoed in her mind as she made the decision that would change everything. The security guard barely glanced at her ID badge as she walked in. She was just another clinger starting her shift, exactly what she wanted them to think. The badge read Lynn, and for the next few months, that would be her name. Her real identity as co-founder was temporarily listed as on extended sabbatical in company records. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the empty corridors, memories of board meetings in these same halls flashed through her mind. Back then, everyone had hung on her every word. Now she was invisible. The transformation was both liberating and eye-opening. She started with the ground floor bathrooms. The work was hard, but she was no stranger to tough jobs. Her journey to success hadn't started in a prestigious college or a fancy internship. It had begun in her parents' small electronics repair shop, where she learned that understanding how things worked from the bottom up was invaluable. The sun was rising when she heard the first employees arriving. A group of junior developers walked past, coffee cups in hand, deep in conversation about deadlines and project managers. They didn't notice her methodically wiping down mirrors, but she noticed everything about them: their stressed expressions, their hurried pace, the way they lowered their voices when mentioning certain managers' names. This was exactly what she had hoped to learn. The real company culture wasn't visible in boardroom presentations or quarterly reports. It lived in break-room conversations, in after-hours complaints, in the small interactions that most executives never saw. By 7 a.m., she had moved to the executive floor. The cleaning cart's squeaky wheel echoed through the premium carpet-lined hallway. Designer suits brushed past her as she dusted the artificial plants decorating the corridor. One executive actually bumped into her cart and kept walking, not even turning around to apologize. She smiled to herself, jotting down mental notes. Every interaction, every ignored greeting, every dismissive glance, it all painted a picture of how her company truly operated when the founders weren't watching. Or so they thought. The morning's final task was emptying the trash bins in the main office area. As she worked, she overheard snippets of conversation, complaints about workload, whispers of favoritism, frustrations about communication breakdowns between departments. These weren't just casual grumbles, they were symptoms of deeper issues that would never make it into official reports. Back in her car at the end of her shift, she pulled out a small notebook. Day 1, she wrote, then paused. The pages would soon be filled with observations that would shape the future of her company. But first, she had to truly understand what it meant to be invisible in a place she helped build. Little did anyone know, the quiet janitor they ignored would soon become their most important wake-up call. But for now, she was content being overlooked, watching, and learning. After all, the best stories don't begin with a bang. They start with a whisper, a choice, and a humble push of a cleaning cart through an empty corridor at dawn.